At first, it felt like a harmless challenge, 24 hours off-grid in a blank spot on the map. A dead zone the satellite apps colored like a bruise, where signal bars died and the compass sometimes hesitated, as if the needle had second thoughts. I'd filmed storms, deserts, riots and rescues, yet nothing unsettled me like that simple warning from an old cartographer in the last town. If your phone goes quiet out there, keep walking. Don't listen for anything. We drove past the final cell tower until even the radio turned to a thin hiss. Pines tightened around the road, then gave way to black rock and low wind-sheared scrub. The air tasted metallic. Every few miles we passed rusted survey stakes and a tangle of weather-worn ribbons tied to branches, markers left by people who didn't want to rely on GPS. By noon, our screens read, "No service." By dusk, the batteries still had power, but the world felt unplugged, like someone had pulled a cord from the sky. Then we found the first sign we weren't alone. A line of footprints that began in soft ash near our camp and ended abruptly at bare stone, as if the person had stepped into the rock and vanished. A few minutes later, my partner whispered my name and pointed beyond the tree line. Something moved there, too large for a deer, too steady for a shadow, circling, testing the edge of our firelight without ever showing its face. And that's when the silence changed, not quieter, heavier, as if the dead zone wasn't empty at all, but crowded with something that didn't want to be recorded. At 2:13 a.m., the tent fabric trembled, and a clicking answered the wind, close enough to count, too close. The story you just heard is a fictional narrative created for entertainment. Before we ever set foot inside that so-called dead zone, we thought we understood isolation. We packed like professionals, paper maps sealed in plastic, a GPS unit with lithium cells, a radio, a flare kit, a trauma pouch, water filtration, and enough food for 3 days in case the road collapsed behind us. The plan was simple. Document what the maps refused to explain, then leave at first light on day 2. My name is Malcolm Graves, and I've spent most of my adult life chasing the edges of the known world for a camera lens. With me was Elena Ruiz, a field biologist who reads landscapes the way surgeons read scans. She wasn't there for thrills. She wanted data. Unusual animal movement reports, missing trail markers, a patch of land locals avoided without ever saying why. Two days earlier, a hiker had stumbled into the town's clinic, dehydrated and shaking, insisting he'd heard someone copying his footsteps. Once our signal died, the rules changed. Time got thicker. Night felt closer. Every decision, where to place the fire, how far to walk for water, when to conserve batteries, carried weight. And the moment we found those footprints that ended on stone, our rational minds began fighting our instincts. Elena kept saying, "It's an animal." "It's always an animal." But her voice didn't sound convinced, and she kept checking behind her like someone expecting an answer. In this story, you'll live every hour with us, what we saw, what we heard, and what we did wrong. Tell me whether you'd stay put or keep moving into the dark. Choose wisely because it matters. If you enjoy survival mysteries like this, subscribe to the channel and hit like so you don't miss the next expedition. And comment below, what country are you watching from right now? The last hint of connection died 10 miles before the dead zone officially began. Not the dramatic kind of cutoff you see in movies. No sudden blackout, no warning siren, just the slow shrinking of possibilities. One bar became one stubborn pixel, then nothing. The phone still glowed with its familiar icons, but it was like holding a toy version of the world, a model that no longer matched the terrain. Malcolm Graves watched the screen go blank on the map app and felt a childish urge to tap harder, as if pressure could force signal out of empty air. Elena Ruiz didn't even try. She had her window down, forearm resting on the door, eyes tracking the tree line like she was reading a long sentence written in moss and shadow. "You feel that?" she asked. Malcolm kept both hands on the wheel. The gravel road had narrowed into a pale scar through dark rock and scrub. "The wind?" "The air," she said. "Different," he breathed in. There was a metallic edge to it, faint as old pennies, the kind of smell you noticed at the start of a storm, or near certain mines. "Could be geology." "It could," Eleanor agreed, which was not the same as believing it. They passed a sign half swallowed by lichen, the paint eaten away. Whatever warning it once carried had been reduced to a few raised letters. Malcolm slowed long enough to film it through the windshield, narrating quietly for the camera in the dash mount, a habit as automatic as breathing. "Entry point," he said. "No service, no marked trails. Locals call it the dead zone." Elena's mouth tightened. "Locals call it don't go there. Dead zone is the polite translation." Malcolm glanced at her. "You sure you want to do this?" She didn't answer right away. She reached into the glove box and pulled out a folded paper map, the kind printed on thick stock with contour lines you could feel with your fingertips. "I've been reading reports for 2 years," she said. "Animals shifting routes, missing markers, weird acoustic anomalies all around this patch, but nobody has clean data from inside it. That's because nobody stays long enough to collect it." Eleanor looked at him then, and for a moment Malcolm saw something human under her professional calm, an anxiety she was managing like a controlled burn. "We're staying 24 hours, she said. "We're not chasing ghosts. We camp, we observe, we leave." Malcolm nodded, though the road itself seemed to disagree. The farther they drove, the more the landscape felt edited. Pines thinned, giving way to hard black stone and low brush bent by relentless wind. The sky was clean, too clean, an empty dome stretched tight. The GPS unit on the dash still showed their coordinates, but the arrow that represented their direction wobbled in tiny, uneasy shivers. "Is it the batteries?" Malcolm asked, tapping the casing. Eleanor leaned forward, watching the screen like it might confess. "Lithium! Fresh! It shouldn't drift like that." The compass on Malcolm's keychain did something worse. It hesitated, then swung as if searching for an answer. Malcolm stopped the car and held it outside the window. The needle twitched and then settled, pointing not north but slightly off, as if the world had been rotated by a few degrees when no one was looking. Elena didn't make a joke. She was quiet for a full minute, listening. Malcolm turned off the engine. Without it, the silence arrived immediately, heavy and complete, the kind that makes you aware of your own heartbeat. He could hear a thin click somewhere inside the car, plastic cooling, metal contracting, and beneath that, something else, faint and irregular, like a distant branch tapping a trunk. Elena's eyes narrowed. "Probably a woodpecker," Malcolm said, though he didn't sound convinced. Elena's voice lowered. "It's not rhythmic." Malcolm started the engine again, more to break the silence than to move, and the distant tapping vanished under the sound. He drove on. They reached the marked coordinates on the paper map by late afternoon, a place where the contour lines tightened into a shallow basin, ringed by ridges. The road ended in a turnaround scattered with old tire tracks and a few half-buried scraps of rusted metal. Somebody had been here before, but not recently. They unloaded with the practiced efficiency of people who'd done this many times. 2 packs, a small tent, a tarp, water containers, a compact stove, a bare canister for food, and a trauma kit that Malcolm never liked to show on camera. He filmed the setup anyway, because the audience wanted procedure and credibility, the reassuring details that made the danger feel earned. Eleanor walked the perimeter while Malcolm pitched the tent. "No fresh scat," she called. "No game trails close." That's good," Malcolm replied. "It's strange," she corrected. "This is a basin. There should be movement." He anchored the tent with extra stakes, the soil gritty and stubborn. He set the tarp as a lean-to against the wind and built a fire ring from flat stones. The fire came easily, too easily, as if the dry brush had been waiting to catch. Flames rose and found a steady rhythm, and the orange light made the basin feel smaller, enclosed. Elena returned with a handful of grey powder. "Ash," she said. "From an old fire?" She shook her head. "No charcoal, no half-burned wood. It's like fine volcanic ash." Malcolm frowned. "There's no volcanic activity here." Elena let the ash drift between her fingers. It floated strangely, clumping in the air before settling. "Tell that to this." They ate early, dehydrated stew and crackers, sipping filtered water that tasted faintly of minerals. The light dropped fast behind the ridges. Malcolm checked their gear again, then held up his satellite messenger and pressed the test button. No outgoing, no incoming, no error message, just a stubborn nothing, as if the device was shouting into a pillow. Elena watched him. No signal, remember? Satellite doesn't need cell towers. It does need a clear path, she said, looking up at the sky, and something about this place feels like it's in the way. Malcolm followed her gaze. The sky was still clear, but he felt a pressure behind his eyes, a faint headache that hadn't been there earlier. He rubbed his temples and tried to ignore it. They documented the basics: time, temperature, wind direction. Elena set small audio recorders around the camp perimeter, marking their locations on the paper map with a pencil. Malcolm walked the edge of the basin, filming the ridgeline, the black rock that rose like broken teeth. "Stay in sight," Elena called. "I'm in sight," he answered. Though the shadows were already stretching, he was returning when he saw the footprints. They started near the fire ring, where the ash spread thin over the ground. A line of impressions pressed into the soft layer, as if someone had walked barefoot through flour. Malcolm crouched, camera in hand, and followed them with his eyes. Each print was clear enough to show toes, clear enough to show weight distribution, clear enough to feel wrong. "Elena," he said, voice tight. She came fast, kneeling beside him. For a moment she didn't speak. Then she said, "Those aren't yours." Malcolm swallowed. "I was wearing boots." "They're not mine," Elena said. "I haven't left the camp since I set the recorders." The prince angled away from the fire, leading toward the dark stone near the tree line. Malcolm stood slowly, scanning the basin. Nothing moved. The wind whispered through the scrub. The footprints continued in a steady line for 12 steps and then ended, abruptly, at bare rock where there was no ash, no soil, nothing soft enough to hold a trace. Malcolm stepped onto the rock and crouched, searching for any continuation. "Maybe it jumped," he said, though the idea sounded thin. Eleanor's eyes lifted to the trees beyond. "Jumped where?" A cold thought slid through Malcolm's mind. If someone had walked in, they had walked close enough to the fire to be seen. Unless they weren't worried about being seen, unless they understood something about the light that Malcolm didn't. He forced himself to do what he always did, turn fear into procedure. "Okay," he said, "we don't assume. We verify. Could be an old print pattern revealed by ash." Elena shook her head. "The ash layer is fresh. It's on top of the older dirt. The prints are on top of the ash." Malcolm felt his mouth go dry. He looked toward the ridges. The last light was fading, and the basin had begun to feel like a bowl with a lid. He thought of the old cartographer's warning: "Keep walking, don't listen for anything." Malcolm hadn't understood it then. Now he felt the edges of understanding tightening around him, like a noose that hadn't been pulled yet. Elena rose and walked the footprint line again, stopping at the rock. She ran her fingers along a narrow seam where stone met soil. "There," she said. "What?" She pointed to a scratch mark on the rock. faint but deliberate, like something sharp had dragged across it. "That's fresh." Malcolm leaned in. The mark caught the firelight for a second and vanished. He tried to film it, but the camera's autofocus hunted and refused to lock. "We should pack up," Malcolm said. Elena didn't answer immediately. She was listening again, head tilted. Malcolm followed her gaze toward the tree line. That was when he saw it. Not a shape exactly, more a shift, a patch of darkness that moved against darkness with unnatural steadiness. Too large for a deer, too smooth for a bear. It drifted along the edge of the trees like it was testing the boundary of their light. "Elena," Malcolm whispered, and his voice sounded smaller than he wanted. "I see it," she whispered back. They stood close to the fire, not touching but aligned, two people sharing the same thin circle of safety. Malcolm's instincts screamed to shout, to claim space, to make noise. Elena's instincts, honed by years of watching animals, did the opposite. She stayed quiet, still, letting the thing reveal itself. It didn't. It moved again, one slow lateral glide, then stopped as if it had decided to wait. Malcolm could feel the hair rising on his arms. He turned his head slightly, eyes never leaving the tree line, and reached for the flare gun on the ground beside the pack. Elena murmured, "Don't." "Why not?" Malcolm kept his voice barely audible. "If it's an animal, a flare could trigger it," she said. "If it's a person, a flare tells them exactly what we have." Malcolm's fingers hovered. He hated that she was right. The darkness at the tree line shifted once more, then melted backward into the trees, until Malcolm couldn't be sure he'd seen anything at all. The moment it vanished, the basin felt emptier and yet somehow more crowded, like a room after someone has left, but you're still aware of where they stood. They didn't talk much after that. Malcolm added wood to the fire until it was taller than necessary. A bright statement against the night. Elena checked the audio recorders, tiny blinking lights from where she sat, refusing to walk out and retrieve them in the dark. Malcolm made a show of checking their food canister, sealing it, moving it far from the tent. He didn't say the word bear, because bears didn't leave barefoot prints that ended on stone. Around 10 p.m., the wind slowed and the temperature dropped. The headache behind Malcolm's eyes returned, sharper now, and Elena rubbed her neck like she was working out a kink that wouldn't release. They took turns speaking into the camera in short, controlled updates, the kind viewers trusted. Malcolm described the lack of signal, the compass drift, the strange ash. Elena described the basin's absence of animal movement, and then, carefully, mentioned the footprints without overcommitting to a conclusion. When they finally climbed into the tent, Malcolm kept his boots on. Elena noticed but didn't comment. The fire outside crackled, and for a while that sound was comforting, familiar. Malcolm lay on his back, staring at the tent ceiling, listening to Eleanor's breathing slow as she tried to sleep. "I don't like it," she said suddenly in the dark. Malcolm didn't pretend not to know what she meant. Me neither. Eleanor's voice was tight. Those prints, they weren't running. Whoever or whatever made them was walking, calm. Malcolm swallowed. Maybe someone's messing with us. In the middle of nowhere, Eleanor said, with no car tracks, no camp nearby, no reason. Malcolm opened his mouth to answer, but a sound cut through the night and stole his words. A clicking, not inside the tent, outside, close enough that the fabric seemed to vibrate with it. 3 clicks, a pause, then 2 more. It wasn't the random snap of a cooling branch. It had spacing, intention. Malcolm held his breath. Elena did too. The fire popped loudly, and for a second Malcolm thought the clicking would stop. It didn't. It shifted, moving around the tent, slow, circling. Malcolm reached for the flashlight and snapped it on, pressing the beam against the tent wall. The nylon glowed pale, and the outline of the world beyond stayed invisible. He could hear the clicking now from the other side, as if something was right there, inches away, studying the light like it was learning. Elena whispered, "Don't make sudden noise." Malcolm's throat tightened. "Elena, if it's a person..." The clicking stopped. In the silence that followed, Malcolm heard something else, a soft scuff in the ash, the sound of weight shifting, and then, impossibly, the faintest echo of a footstep that matched the rhythm of Malcolm's own heartbeat. He realized he was gripping the flashlight so hard, his knuckles hurt. He forced his voice into a whisper. "Who's there?" No answer. The clicking returned, but this time it came from farther away, near the trees. Then another set of clicks answered from the opposite side of the basin near the ridge. 2 points, then a third, closer than either of them, just beyond the fire ring. Elena's eyes were wide in the dim tent light. "That's not one," she breathed. "That's multiple." Malcolm's mind raced through options. Flare, shout, run, stay. The cartographer's warning returned with brutal clarity. Keep walking, don't listen for anything. But Malcolm couldn't walk anywhere without exposing them in the open. He held the flashlight against the tent wall again, sweeping it as if light could push back whatever was out there. That was when the tent fabric trembled, not from wind, but from a gentle pressure, like a hand placed flat against it. Elena went perfectly still. Malcolm's breath stalled in his chest. The pressure lingered for 2 seconds, 3, then slid downward, slow, deliberate, leaving a faint crease in the nylon as it moved. Malcolm whispered, barely forming the words, "We're leaving at first light." Elena didn't argue. Outside, the clicking stopped again. And in the silence, a voice, low, almost swallowed by the night, seemed to repeat something that sounded like Malcolm's name, not spoken clearly, but attempted, as if the darkness was practicing how to call him. Malcolm didn't sleep. He only pretended to. The way you pretend around a campfire when you don't want fear to look you in the eye. The tent held their breath and their heat, but it didn't feel like shelter. It felt like a thin envelope, sealed shut, with the world pressing its face to the other side. After the last click faded, The night didn't return to normal. It stayed alert. Malcolm listened to the fire's cadence outside, crackle, pop, brief hush, like a code he was trying to learn. Elena lay on her side, knees drawn slightly upward, one hand near the zipper as if she might need to open it fast. He could tell she was awake by the way she swallowed, carefully, as if even that sound might be too loud. At some point, the fire softened. The glow dimmed through the tent fabric. The temperature inside fell a degree at a time. Malcolm's headache sharpened until it felt like a thumb pressed behind his eyes. When he shifted, the tent floor whispered against the sleeping pad, and Elena's gaze snapped to him instantly. "Don't," she mouthed. He stilled. The silence outside wasn't empty anymore. It was layered. Malcolm began noticing textures in it, faint rustles that didn't match wind, pauses that felt intentional, and the occasional soft scuff, as if something was careful not to step on anything that would crack. Once he heard a distant click, answered by another click from farther away, and then nothing, like a conversation that stopped the moment it realized it was being listened to. When the first pale light leaked into the basin, Malcolm checked his watch. 5:41 a.m. The world outside should have looked less threatening at dawn, but the basin still felt sealed. The ridges held the morning like a lid, trapping a cold, metallic air close to the ground. Elena whispered, "We pack now." Malcolm nodded and reached for the zipper with slow, controlled movements. He didn't want sudden sounds. He opened the tent a few inches and paused, scanning with one eye. The fire was almost out, just a dull core of coals, a faint ribbon of smoke. The ash around it looked disturbed. He eased the tent flap open fully. The footprints were back. They circled the fire ring in a patient loop, pressed cleanly into the ash as if whoever made them had taken time to walk around and around, mapping the edges of their light. The prints came close to the tent, close enough that Malcolm could see the depth of the heel, the spread of the toes. But again, they didn't lead away. They ended at the bare rock like last night, as if the stone swallowed them. Elena crawled out beside him, eyes fixed on the ground. Her face tightened, not in panic, but in a kind of controlled anger. "It came back," she said. Malcolm stood and scanned the tree line. Or it never left. They moved fast without running. Malcolm threw gear into packs without his usual neatness. Elena collected the audio recorders, 1, 2, 3, keeping her eyes up between each retrieval like a deer at the edge of a clearing. Malcolm watched her hands as she checked the tiny memory cards. Her fingers trembled once, then steadied. "Any tracks besides the bare feet?" Malcolm asked. Elena crouched near the ash. "No boot prints, no paw prints, nothing else fresh." Malcolm looked toward the turnaround where they'd parked. The car sat where they'd left it, but something about it looked wrong. Not damaged, not moved, just subtly altered, like the angle of a door or the posture of a familiar object after someone has touched it. He walked toward it and stopped short. The driver's side mirror had been folded in. Malcolm hadn't folded it. He never folded it on gravel roads because he liked seeing the ridge behind him. Elena came up beside him, silent. They stared at the mirror like it was a sentence in a language they didn't speak. "It wants us to notice," Elena said. Or it wants us to doubt ourselves, Malcolm replied. He unlocked the car, slid into the driver's seat, and turned the key. The engine didn't catch. It tried one weak churn, a hesitant cough, then nothing. Malcolm tried again, slower this time, as if gentleness might persuade it. The starter clicked, then fell silent. He turned the key a third time. Nothing. Elena leaned in through the open passenger door. Battery? It was fine yesterday, Malcolm said. His voice came out tighter than he meant. He popped the hood and stepped out, breath frosting slightly in the morning air. The engine compartment looked normal. No cut cables. No obvious sabotage. Malcolm checked the terminals. Clean. He pressed the connection. Solid. Elena stood behind him, listening, not to the car, but to the basin. Do you hear that? Malcolm paused. At first, he heard only wind. Then he caught it, a faint hum, low and steady, like distant power lines. But there were no lines here, no poles, no infrastructure. It's coming from the ridge, Elena said. Malcolm shut the hood with a controlled thud, then stopped as the sound echoed too long. The basin seemed to hold on to noise, stretching it like rubber. Elena said, "If the car won't start, we walk." Malcolm looked at the road they'd come in on, a pale ribbon cutting through rock and scrub until it vanished around a bend. How far to the last town? Elena pulled out the paper map. On foot, if we stay on the road, maybe 6 hours. Maybe more if the terrain slows us. Malcolm grabbed the satellite messenger again and pressed the button. Still nothing. The device might as well have been a paperweight. They didn't debate. They did what survival demanded. Accept reality as it was, not as it should be. They took only what mattered: water, filtration, food, medkit, map, compass, extra layers, flare kit, headlamps, and Malcolm's camera gear stripped down to one body and 2 lenses. Malcolm hesitated over the tripod, then left it. Elena hesitated over a spare recorder, then clipped it to her pack anyway. They locked the car out of habit, even though the gesture felt pointless, and started down the gravel road into the cold morning. For the first 30 minutes, Malcolm felt a small relief. Movement had always been his answer to fear. Walking made him feel less like prey. The basin fell behind them, and the ridges opened slightly. The hum faded, but the headache didn't. Elena kept her pace brisk, eyes scanning the roadside. There were still no birds, no insects, no animal tracks. The absence of life was its own kind of warning. Malcolm tried to speak casually, to keep their nerves from feeding on silence. "If this is a magnetic anomaly," he said, "it could mess with the starter solenoid, or the battery." Eleanor didn't look at him. "And the barefoot footprints?" "Not explained," he admitted. They rounded a bend and froze. A trail marker, one of the weathered stakes they'd seen yesterday, stood beside the road with a strip of faded fabric tied to it. But the fabric wasn't fluttering. It hung still, heavy, like it had been soaked. Elena reached for it and stopped short. "Don't touch it." Malcolm leaned closer. The fabric looked damp, but not with water. It had a slick sheen, almost oily. The smell hit them both at the same time, sharp, chemical, like scorched plastic. "Elena," Malcolm murmured. "What is that?" She swallowed. "I don't know." They backed away without touching it and continued, but the road ahead began to look subtly wrong. The gravel seemed darker, the stones slightly larger. Malcolm couldn't prove it, but he had the unsettling sense they'd walked this stretch already. A sick déjà vu tugged at him. He checked his watch. 7:22 a.m. They'd been walking for nearly an hour and 40 minutes. They should have reached the old sign by now, the one half swallowed by lichen near the entry point. They didn't. Instead, the road straightened into a shallow dip and then rose again, and at the crest there was the same stake with the same damp ribbon. Elena stopped dead, her jaw clenched. She didn't need to say it. "We're circling," Malcolm whispered. "That's not possible," Elena said, but her voice didn't believe her. Malcolm pulled out the compass. The needle twitched, hesitated, then settled, pointing in a direction that didn't match the road's orientation. He turned his body. The needle followed, but not smoothly. It jerked, like it was being tugged by something unseen. Elena took the compass from him and held it away from her body, as if distance might make it honest. "This place is interfering," she said, voice low. "Magnetic field. Something." Malcolm looked down the road behind them. It looked normal. Ahead, it looked normal. And yet, they had returned to the same marker with the same oily ribbon. Elena forced herself to speak slowly, as if explaining it would make it less frightening. If this is an anomaly zone, it could distort direction, maybe even perception. People in the Arctic get white-out disorientation. In deserts, you walk in circles without realizing it. If the cues are wrong, Malcolm finished the thought, then the road becomes a loop. He tried to laugh and failed. The sound died in his throat. Elena's eyes flicked to the trees. "We stop relying on the road." "We use the map and the ridgeline. We pick a bearing and follow it." Malcolm stared at the scrub and rock to either side. Leaving the road meant entering uneven terrain with limited visibility. It meant giving up the one linear guide they had. But staying on the road meant walking in circles until they ran out of water. He nodded. "Okay. Bearing." Elena unfolded the map with gloved hands, anchored it against her thigh, and studied the contour lines. She looked up at the ridges, matching shapes to the ink. Malcolm watched her face, how she fought to keep calm, how her mind worked like a machine refusing to jam. "That ridge," she said, pointing. "If we cross it, we should drop into the drainage that runs toward the town. Water follows gravity, so do roads. If we find the drainage, we follow it." Malcolm looked at the ridge. From here it didn't look high, just a sloping rise of black rock and sparse brush. But he'd learned long ago that distance lies in hostile terrain. They stepped off the gravel and into the scrub. The ground changed immediately. The soil turned gritty and dark, and the metallic smell grew stronger. Malcolm's boots crunched on stone that sounded too brittle, as if it might fracture like thin glass. Elena moved carefully, testing each step. She found a patch of ash again, fine, grey, drifting in hollows where wind couldn't carry it away. Malcolm filmed in short bursts, his narration clipped. "We're leaving the road," he said, "compass unreliable, possible loop, following terrain features." He didn't say what he was thinking, that the loop felt less like an accident and more like a hand guiding them back. Halfway up the slope the wind died, not gradually, instantly. 1 second it moved through the scrub, and the next it stopped as if someone had shut a door. The silence snapped into place, clean and total. Malcolm felt it in his skin. Elena stopped too, her breathing shallow, then the hum returned, stronger now, rising out of the rock beneath their feet like a buried engine. Malcolm put his hand on the stone. It vibrated faintly, a subtle trembling you could feel more than hear. His headache sharpened. Elena's voice trembled despite her effort. "That's not natural." Malcolm's mouth went dry. Could be an underground facility. Old mining equipment, something abandoned. Elena looked at him, and the fear in her eyes was honest. In a dead zone, with no signal and no wildlife. The hum deepened as they climbed, as if they were approaching its source. The rock underfoot shifted from rough and fractured to smooth slabs, dark and almost polished. Malcolm's boot slipped once and he caught himself with a hand on the stone. It felt cold, but also strangely slick. Eleanor stopped suddenly, holding up a hand. "What?" Malcolm whispered. She pointed ahead. Between two boulders, half hidden by brush, was a straight line that didn't belong in nature, a seam, a narrow gap running vertical, too precise. Malcolm stepped closer and felt his stomach tighten. It was a door, not a wooden door, not a cabin door. Something industrial, dark metal flush with stone, as if it had been built into the hillside. There was no handle, no obvious hinges. Just a rectangular outline and a small panel to one side, corroded but intact. Malcolm raised his camera, lens trembling slightly. "Elena?" She didn't answer. She moved closer, examining it like a scientist confronting a forbidden specimen. The hum was strongest here, vibrating in Malcolm's bones. Elena leaned toward the panel. "This looks like—" A click sounded behind them. Malcolm spun. On the slope below, at the edge of the brush, a figure stood perfectly still, not close enough to see details, close enough to know it was human-shaped. Too tall to be a child, too narrow to be a bear. It didn't move like an animal. It simply stood there, watching. Malcolm's heart slammed against his ribs. He felt the primal urge to shout, but his throat locked. Elena's hand tightened on his sleeve. The figure took one slow step forward, and then, from somewhere higher up the ridge, above the door, another click answered, sharp and deliberate. Elena whispered, barely forming the words, "We're not alone." Malcolm's voice came out in a thin rasp. "Back to the road." Eleanor shook her head quickly. "No, down the drainage, now." They turned, trying not to run, trying not to trigger whatever rule governed this place. Malcolm forced his feet to move with control, but adrenaline made his steps clumsy. The hum in the rock seemed to follow them, vibrating up through his legs. Behind them, the clicking did not chase like footsteps. It tracked them, appearing from different points, answering itself like coordinated signals. They crested the ridge faster than they should have, lungs burning in the thin, cold air. On the far side, the land dropped into a shallow drainage lined with sharper rock and a ribbon of damp soil. Elena pointed down. "Water," she said, and her voice held a desperate relief. "Follow it." They descended, boots sliding on loose gravel. Malcolm nearly fell twice. Elena moved with a grim focus, using her hands when she had to, refusing to look back too long. The drainage narrowed. Scrub thickened. And then Malcolm saw something that turned his blood cold. A strip of orange survey tape tied to a branch ahead, just like the ones near the road. He stopped. "That can't be." Elena stared at it, breathing hard. "We didn't come this way before." Malcolm stepped closer and saw the tape wasn't just tied, it was braided, twisted into a crude pattern, like someone had woven it intentionally. Under it, the bark had been scraped clean, fresh, and pale. A message, not written in words, but in warning. Elena's hand shook as she reached toward it, then pulled back. "Don't touch," she whispered, echoing herself from earlier. Malcolm's gaze swept the drainage. The shrubs seemed too still, the air too heavy. His headache pulsed with each heartbeat. Then, from deeper in the drainage, a voice called out, "Malcolm!" It wasn't shouted. It wasn't even loud. It was spoken softly, like someone trying to coax a skittish animal out of hiding. The voice sounded wrong, not robotic, not monstrous, but slightly mistuned, like a familiar song played in the wrong key. Elena grabbed Malcolm's arm so hard it hurt. "Don't answer," she hissed. The voice came again, closer this time, repeating the syllables like it was practicing them. Column. Malcolm's mouth went dry. He wanted to believe it was a person, a lost hiker, someone playing a sick joke. But the cadence didn't match human speech. It matched mimicry. Elena spoke through clenched teeth. "Keep moving, eyes forward." They pushed on, following the damp soil. The drainage curved, and for a moment Malcolm felt hope, real hope, that gravity would lead them out, that water would bring them back to a normal world with towers and roads and people. Then the ground under Malcolm's boot gave way. He dropped hard, a sudden sinkhole hidden beneath brush, and the world tilted as he slid down a steep, narrow slope into darkness. His shoulder slammed rock. His camera strap yanked tight across his chest. He grabbed at roots and found nothing solid. "Elena!" he shouted before he could stop himself. Above, Elena's face flashed into view, pale and panicked. She dropped to her knees, reaching down. "Hold on!" Malcolm tried to plant his boots against the crumbling wall. Loose ash poured around him like sand. The hum was back down here, deep and close, vibrating in the earth as if he'd fallen onto the roof of something buried. His headlamp swung, beam slicing through dust, and caught a surface below, not natural rock but smooth metal, angled like a hatch. Malcolm's breath hitched. He wasn't falling into a hole in the ground. He was falling into an opening, and from somewhere beneath that hatch, a slow clicking began directly under him, rising in a calm, measured pattern, as if whatever was below had been waiting for him to arrive. Malcolm hit the metal hard enough to knock the air out of his lungs. The impact rang through his bones with a hollow industrial clang that had no business being in wilderness. Dust swirled in his headlamp beam like smoke, and the clicking beneath him continued, slow, measured, patient, coming from the other side of that hatch, as if someone down there was tapping a knuckle against steel. "Elena!" he rasped, trying to keep his voice low now that he'd made the mistake of shouting once. "I'm on something. Metal." Above him, Elena's silhouette blocked the thin strip of morning light. Her face was strained, eyes wide with a kind of fear Malcolm had never seen in her. Fear that wasn't about animals or weather, but about rules they didn't understand. She lay flat on the ground and reached down as far as she could, fingers scrabbling at loose grit. "Don't move," she whispered. "You'll slide." Malcolm tried to plant his boots against the crumbling wall, but the ash behaved like dry sand. Every shift sent another small avalanche down onto his shoulders, into his collar, into his mouth. He tasted minerals and panic. He forced himself to breathe slow, to keep from hyperventilating in the cramped space. "I can't climb," he said. "It's collapsing." Elena glanced around, her head turning sharply like she'd heard something behind her. Then she unshouldered her pack, dug inside, and pulled out a coil of thin climbing line. Malcolm hadn't even remembered they had it, an emergency length for river crossings and steep scrambles. She tied one end around her waist with quick, practiced movements, then anchored the other end around a jagged rock spur near the hole. "Okay," she said, voice controlled. "I'm coming down a little, you grab the line, then I pull." The clicking below stopped. That silence was worse than the sound because it felt like a tension. Malcolm held his breath as Elena eased her legs into the hole, boots braced against the sides. Her weight shifted grit loose, and the walls hissed as ash slid past her calves. Then the hatch under Malcolm moved. Not much, just a subtle tilt, a fraction of an inch, but enough to make his stomach drop. The metal wasn't fixed, it was a door, and something underneath had tested it, like a person checking whether a trap is set. Malcolm's headlamp beam cut across the hatch seam and caught a thin line of darkness widening, and from that slit came a draught, cold, damp, and carrying a smell that didn't belong outdoors. Old concrete, machine oil, and something faintly electrical. "Elena," Malcolm whispered, panic sharpening his voice. "The hatch—" "I know," she hissed back. Don't panic." A sound came from inside the gap, not a click this time, a soft scrape, like rubber on metal. Malcolm pressed his palm flat against the hatch instinctively, as if he could keep it closed by force. The metal vibrated under his hand, that same low hum he'd felt on the ridge, stronger here, like a generator running behind a wall. Elena lowered another foot and reached the level of Malcolm's shoulder. Her face appeared in the narrow space, illuminated by his headlamp. She looked down at the seam, then at him. "Whatever this is," she whispered, "it's active." The word active didn't mean old bunker. It didn't mean abandoned mine. Active meant power. Active meant people. Active meant they had stepped into someone else's world with cameras, and paper maps like that would protect them. Elena pushed the rope toward Malcolm. "Take it. Wrap it around your arm once, not your wrist. Don't let it cut circulation." Malcolm did as told, fingers clumsy with dust and adrenaline. The moment he cinched the rope, Elena leaned back to take his weight, careful, steady, muscles shaking with effort. "On 3, she said. 1, 2... The hatch shifted again. This time it dropped with a dull thud, opening wider under Malcolm's torso as if a latch had released. He slid inches toward the gap before Elena jerked the rope tight and stopped him. Malcolm's heart hammered. He looked down into the opening and saw darkness, and in that darkness a faint pale glow like a corridor light around a corner. And then, so quick he wasn't sure he'd seen it, a shape moved under the hatch, something human-sized withdrawing from view. Elena saw it too. Her breath caught. For one frozen second neither of them moved. Then a voice rose from below, not loud, but perfectly clear. "Easy! Don't fight it!" The accent was local, almost casual, like a ranger calling hikers off a cliff edge. That normality was what made Malcolm's fear spike, because nothing else about this had been normal. Elena's grip tightened on the rope. She leaned in close to Malcolm's ear. "We don't go down," she whispered. "We get out." Malcolm nodded once, jaw clenched, and shifted his weight upward while Elena hauled. Ash slid. The walls groaned softly. Malcolm clawed at the gritty sides, boots searching for purchase. It was slow, humiliating work, the kind that turned you into an animal. His camera banged against his chest, his headlamp beam shook wildly. Then, from above the hole, came a sharp, deliberate click. Elena flinched. She looked up, eyes widening as if she'd just seen something on the ridgeline. "Pull!" she said, voice suddenly urgent. "Now!" Malcolm didn't ask what she'd seen. He focused on climbing, on moving 1 inch at a time. Elena's arms trembled with strain, but she didn't let the rope slip. Malcolm's shoulders burned. His fingers scraped rock. His lungs felt too big for his chest, and just as his hands reached the rim, a shadow fell across Elena's face. Not from the sun, from something standing over her. Elena's eyes locked upward, and her expression changed into pure warning. She opened her mouth to shout, but no sound came out. Someone above grabbed the rope and yanked hard, ripping the line out of Elena's control. Malcolm's stomach lurched. The rope tightened around his arm like a bite. He jerked downward, nearly sliding back onto the opening hatch. "Elena!" he shouted. She lunged forward and threw her weight onto the rope again, fighting whoever held it above. Malcolm saw only boots at first, dark, mudless boots planted on the rock, then a gloved hand. The glove was black, clean and professional, nothing like a hiker's. A second hand appeared, steadying the first, and the rope began to move with calm, practiced strength. Elena's face contorted with effort. "Knife!" she gasped at Malcolm. "Cut it! Cut it!" Malcolm fumbled for the small utility knife clipped to his belt. His fingers were numb with dust and adrenaline. He pulled the blade free and brought it to the rope. If he cut it, he'd lose the only thing keeping him from dropping through the hatch. If he didn't, whoever was above would haul him like cargo. He hesitated for half a heartbeat. That was long enough. The rope snapped taut and Malcolm was jerked upward, his ribs scraping the edge. He grabbed the rim, muscles screaming, and hauled with everything he had. Elena shoved from behind, hands under his pack straps, pushing him up like she was lifting a dead weight. Malcolm rolled onto the surface and came up on his knees, coughing ash, knife in hand. He saw two men. They were dressed in muted grey-green field gear with no insignia, faces partially covered by neck gaiters, eyes hidden behind tinted protective lenses. One held the rope, the other held something that looked like a compact rifle, angled down, not yet aimed at their bodies but positioned like a threat that didn't need words. A third figure stood farther back on the slope, almost blending into the scrub, tall, still, watching. Malcolm realized with a sick jolt that the thing at the tree line last night had likely been a person all along, using shadow and silence as camouflage. Elena rose slowly beside Malcolm, hands open, palms out. Her voice came out controlled, professional, like she was speaking to an aggressive dog. "We're lost," she said. "We're leaving." "There's no need for—" The man with the rope tilted his head slightly, as if listening to an earpiece. Then he made a small clicking sound with his tongue, 2 quick clicks, a pause, 1 longer click. The third figure answered with the same pattern. Malcolm's skin prickled. The clicking wasn't random. It was communication. The rifleman didn't speak. He pointed with the muzzle, not at their heads, but at the hole. The man with the rope finally spoke again, calm as ever. "You're in a restricted area. The fastest way out is not the way you came." Elena's eyes narrowed. "Then show us the way out." The man glanced at Malcolm's camera hanging from his neck. "Turn it off." Malcolm tightened his grip on the knife without meaning to. "We're documenting a survival trip. We didn't see any signs." The man's voice stayed even. "Turn it off." Elena looked at Malcolm, one sharp, silent look that said, "Alive first, footage later." Malcolm swallowed his pride and reached up, fingers trembling, and powered down the camera. The tiny whir of the lens stopping felt like surrender. The rifleman gestured again toward the hole, more insistent this time. Elena stiffened. "We are not going down there," she said. The man with the rope didn't raise his voice. "If you don't go down, you don't go out. And if you don't go out, you stay." The threat wasn't shouted. It was delivered like policy. Malcolm felt the basin's silence pressing in around them. He glanced toward the ridgeline, hoping to see open terrain, a route to run. But he saw what Elena had likely seen earlier, more figures, spaced out along the slope, watching, steady, controlling the angles. They weren't chasing, they were containing. Elena's jaw clenched. She leaned close to Malcolm and whispered without moving her lips, "If this is military, don't fight. If it's private, don't fight." "Either way, we don't win out here." Malcolm's throat tightened. "We go down and what? Disappear?" Elena's eyes flicked toward the open hatch. "We go down and we learn the layout. We find another exit." The man with the rope stepped aside just enough to reveal the hatch fully. It was a heavy metal door set into a concrete collar buried under the soil. Someone had recently cleared debris from it, fresh scrape marks, clean edges. Beneath it, a ladder descended into dim light. The smell rising from below was stronger now. Oil, damp concrete, and something sterile like a hospital corridor. Elena went first, hands on the ladder, moving carefully. Malcolm followed, one rung at a time, hearing the men above reposition, but not follow immediately. The hatch remained open behind them, a rectangle of pale daylight shrinking as they descended. At the bottom, their boots landed on a concrete floor that felt cold through the soles. Malcolm's headlamp revealed a corridor extending in two directions. The walls were painted a faded institutional grey, chipped and stained. There were old warning signs, some too corroded to read, and newer ones pasted over them, crisp and modern, as if someone had updated the facility without bothering to erase its past. A low hum vibrated through the floor, constant and alive. Elena whispered, "This is not abandoned." They moved down the corridor, guided by a man who followed behind them now, not the rifleman, but the rope holder. Up close, Malcolm saw the man's gear was too clean, his boots too unworn. The gaiter hid his mouth, but his eyes behind the lenses were steady, bored even, like this was routine. They passed a heavy door with a keypad. Malcolm's stomach tightened when he saw the small green light on the keypad, powered. They passed a wall vent that exhaled cool air. They passed a junction where cables ran along the ceiling in neat bundles, disappearing into the dark. Eleanor stopped at a corner where the corridor widened into a small monitoring alcove. Malcolm's headlamp caught a bank of screens. They were on. Static on two, live feeds on others, grainy infrared images of the basin above, of their campsite, of the road loop, of the ridge where they'd found the seam door. Malcolm saw himself on one screen from above, stumbling down the drainage. The footage was time-stamped. They had been watched the entire time. Elena's face tightened with cold fury. "You tracked us." The man behind them didn't answer directly. "You entered. You stayed. You moved toward infrastructure." Malcolm's mouth went dry. "Infrastructure," he repeated. "So this is—" "What? A facility? Who are you?" The man paused like he was choosing words carefully. "People who don't want visitors." A different sound approached from deeper in the corridor. Footsteps, multiple, coming fast. The man behind them clicked his tongue again in a short pattern, and the footsteps slowed, then resumed at a measured pace. Elena's eyes flicked to Malcolm. The same thought passed between them. This place had protocols, and they were not part of them. The corridor lights flickered once, just once. But in that brief dimming, Malcolm saw a shadow move across one of the monitors that didn't match any person in the frame. It slid along the edge like a smear of darkness, too smooth, too large. The light steadied again, and the monitor returned to normal. Malcolm wasn't sure if he'd imagined it. He hoped he had. They were led into a small room with a metal table bolted to the floor and 2 chairs on either side, like an interrogation space designed by someone who didn't care about comfort. A camera in the corner blinked red. The hum here was louder, as if the walls held machinery behind them. The man gestured. "Sit." Elena sat without taking her eyes off him. Malcolm sat beside her, shoulders tight, pulse loud in his ears. The man stood in front of them, arms folded. "You will be escorted out," he said. "You will not return. You will not publish what you saw. You will not speak about the location." Malcolm let out a short, humorless breath. "You can't seriously expect—" The man leaned forward slightly. "You already can't send anything, no signal, no satellite, no GPS that behaves. Your footage won't upload from inside the zone, and when you leave, you'll have one story to tell. Lost, disoriented, equipment failure. You'll be grateful you got out." Elena's voice was steady but sharp. "What is this place?" The man didn't answer immediately. He glanced toward the camera in the corner, then back to them. "It's safer for you not to know." Malcolm's mind raced. Military, private security, illegal operation. None of it mattered in the immediate sense. The immediate sense was this: they were underground, uninvited, and the people controlling this place had already demonstrated they could loop a road and mimic a voice. Elena's hand slid under the table, subtle. Malcolm followed her movement with his peripheral vision. She was reaching into her pocket, fingers brushing something small, one of her recorders. Her eyes met Malcolm's for half a second. She was thinking the same thing he was. Proof. The man continued speaking, calm, rehearsed. "You will be escorted to your vehicle. You will leave. If you comply, this ends." Elena's thumb hovered over the recorder's button. The camera in the corner blinked red again, and Malcolm felt a chill crawl up his spine because the blink seemed deliberate, like it was reacting. Elena pressed the button. A faint beep sounded in the silence. Small, almost nothing, but the hum in the walls changed pitch instantly, rising for a fraction of a second, like a startled animal. The man's head snapped toward the camera, then back to Elena. His voice dropped, no longer calm. "What did you do?" Elena held his gaze. "Nothing." The door behind them clicked. Not a tongue click, a lock. Malcolm's stomach dropped as footsteps rushed in the corridor outside. Faster now, more urgent. The man's hand went to his radio, and he clicked his tongue in rapid bursts, sharper, almost angry. A voice answered through the wall speakers. Flat, automated, female. Containment protocol. Active. Elena's face drained of color. Malcolm's mouth went dry. Because whatever restricted area meant above ground, the word containment meant something else entirely down here. And somewhere beyond the door, in the corridor's dim light, a slow, familiar clicking began again, measured, patient, coming closer, as if it had been waiting for the signal to change.